Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we have another Commander's Guild deck tech. This one is titled the Copier's Jammed, and you'll find out why in just a minute. But if you haven't seen this show before, what we're doing is we are randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com, working with a budget of $100 or less, and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So this week, our chosen card was Archaeomancer. 2 blue for a human wizard, 1/2. When Archaeomancer enters the battlefield, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So, Archaeomancer is a phenomenal card, always useful, always has good hits for it, and so when I started building this deck, it seemed very easy to find a way to kind of break Archaeomancer. It seemed very easy to find random cards that we could recur from our graveyard, powerful instants, powerful sorceries. And so I didn't want to immediately just go and make an infinite combo, and I'm not going to lie, there are some infinite combos in this deck, but honestly that's because it's harder not to break Archaeomancer than it is to break Archaeomancer. So instead, I decided to add a couple colors, and our commander for the week is Riku of Two Reflections. 2 green, blue, red for a legendary creature, human wizard, 2/2. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you can pay blue, red. If you do, copy that spell, and you can choose new targets for the copy. And whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay green, blue. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature. So we have one major goal with this deck, and that is to play as many possible copy effects, and we want not to copy our spells, not to really copy our abilities, but we specifically want to copy Archaeomancer. We want to use instants and sorceries that create a token copy of a creature, create a copy of Archaeomancer, and then that token copy will enter and put the token creator or the copy effect back into our hand, letting us do it all again. So in an ideal world, we'll have a massive army of 1/2 creatures that just keep getting back copy effects. So with that in mind, let's turn to some of our themes for this deck. We mentioned copying. Now, honestly, we really only have the one theme. We want to copy everything. We want to copy creatures, we want to copy spells, and we want to copy abilities. So because Archaeomancer falls into each of these categories, it works out perfectly for us. Archaeomancer is a creature that we can copy. It recurs spells, which we can then copy. And the ability to put the spells back into our hand is an ability which we can copy. So we'll run through each of these. Faded Infatuation is blue for an instant. Put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of target creature you control, hopefully Archaeomancer. And if it's your turn, scry 2. A simple copy effect that once we cast it, will go to the graveyard. The trigger for Archaeomancer goes on the stack, and so the Archaeomancer that comes in can actually return this exact card to our hand. The way that the stack works in that regard is that we're able to get any spell we cast back as long as the Archaeomancer hits the board when it resolves. Narumeha, Master Wizard, is 2 blue for a legendary creature, human wizard, 3/3, flash. When Narumeha, Master Wizard, enters the battlefield, copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy, and other wizards you control get +1/+1. Now, Archaeomancer is a wizard. I don't anticipate that becoming incredibly useful for Narumeha, although it may for our next card. But Narumeha in particular is incredibly important in this deck because if we have, say, an Archaeomancer on the board, we cast Faded Infatuation targeting the Archaeomancer, then we can cast Narumeha. She comes in, she copies the Faded Infatuation. That new copy can then target Narumeha, which could then create another copy of Narumeha, repeating this process. Obviously, we would have to get rid of our original Narumeha. It's a legendary rule, so we'd have to keep just one of them. But if we're using Faded Infatuation, we can scry 2 pretty much an infinite number of times. So that's just one example of how incredibly powerful these copy effects can be with some of the wizards in this deck. And then finally, our last theme, I mentioned copying abilities. We have Harmonic Prodigy, 1 and a red, for a 1/3 human wizard with prowess. And if an ability of a shaman or another wizard you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. So when we cast Archaeomancer to return 1 spell to our hand from our graveyard, Harmonic Prodigy actually lets that ability trigger twice, putting 2 spells into our hand from our graveyard, which can get out of hand very, very quickly if it's allowed to stick around. So, obviously, as you can see, most of our deck is about copying, well, everything, right? Creatures, spells, abilities, whatever. But there are some key cards that we do want to try to get onto the board as quickly as we can. The first of these is Step Through, which doesn't look like much at first glance. It's 3 blue for a sorcery that returns 2 target creatures to their owner's hands. But the important text is that second ability that says Wizard Cycling 2. So we can pay 2 mana, discard this card, search our library for a wizard, and put it into our hand. Archaeomancer is, of course, a wizard. So Step Through is basically like another copy of Archaeomancer. We're able to tutor up the creatures when we need them to sometimes, but because this is a budget deck, we don't have access to a ton of tutors, and Step Through is literally just a 2 mana tutor for Archaeomancer, so it's certainly something we'd love to see very early on in the game. Our next key card is Isika's Chariot, which is 3 and a green for a 4/4 legendary artifact vehicle. When Isika's Chariot enters the battlefield, create 2 2/2 green cat creature tokens. That's nice, but it's not the main reason it's here. Whenever Isika's Chariot attacks, we create a token that's a copy of target token you control, and it has crew for 4. So what we really want to be doing is making token copies of our Archaeomancer. With Isika's Chariot, we're able to copy those tokens every single combat step, letting us get back another copy effect, maybe even removal or a counterspell if we really need it. So Isika's Chariot is just every turn, it's basically a free copy for our Archaeomancers if we've already gotten 1 token on the battlefield. And then finally, our last key card is Rite of Replication, which has shown up quite a bit in some of our recent decks, but 2 blue for a sorcery with kicker 5, and you create a token that's a copy of target creature, and if this spell was kicked, create 5 of those tokens instead. So, Rite of Replication, again, just a copy effect. We can copy Archaeomancer, immediately put Rite of Replication back into our hand, but if we're able to kick it, we make 5 Archaeomancers. Each of those Archaeomancers pulls back some spell from our graveyard to our hand, which means one of them most likely going to be Rite of Replication, and the other 4 could be ramp, removal, counterspells, more copy effects. So this is incredibly useful, and it just gives our deck a ton of value whenever we might need it. Now, we've talked about the themes and the key cards. I do also want to touch on some cool interactions that I ran into while I was building this deck because, like I mentioned earlier, it almost seems like it's harder not to break Archaeomancer in Commander than it is to actually break Archaeomancer. So the first one we have is Progenitor Mimic plus Walk the Aeons. So Progenitor Mimic is 4 green-blue for a shapeshifter, 0/0. You may have Progenitor Mimic enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it has, at the beginning of your upkeep, if this creature isn't a token, create a token that's a copy of this creature. So what we really want is Progenitor Mimic to come in as Archaeomancer. This will give us, in each of our upkeeps, a new Archaeomancer token, which when we combine that with Walk the Aeons, which is 4 blue for a sorcery with buyback to sacrifice 3 islands, hopefully we never use that, target player takes an extra turn after this one. This is the only extra turn spell in the entire deck, but if we're able to put Progenitor Mimic as a copy of Archaeomancer, and we have a Walk the Aeons, at that point we can take an infinite number of turns, because at the start of our turn, we make a new Archaeomancer, which puts Walk the Aeons into our hand, we cast it, taking an extra turn, and on our next upkeep, we repeat the process. So, Yeah, this might not be the most fun way to end a game, but it's definitely a way to get there, and both cards are 6 mana, so it's not like it's something that can just happen out of nowhere. And it's very easily interacted with because someone can just kill the Mimic or counter the Walk the Aeons, but definitely still a nice interaction piece and a nice win condition if you need it. And then, similar to this, we have another infinite combo actually in our cool interactions. We have Dualcaster Mage and Heat Shimmer. So Dualcaster Mage is 1 red for a human wizard 2/2 with flash. When Dualcaster Mage enters the battlefield, you copy target instant or sorcery spell, and you may choose new targets for the copy. And if we combine that with Heat Shimmer, 2 and a red for a sorcery, create a token that's a copy of target creature, except it has haste, and at the beginning of the end step, exile this permanent. So similar to the Narumeha combo we mentioned earlier, we cast Heat Shimmer, targeting any creature except for Dualcaster Mage. Then we cast Dualcaster Mage to copy the Heat Shimmer. The copy of Heat Shimmer targets Dualcaster Mage, making a copy of it. The copy of the Mage comes in, copies Heat Shimmer again, and we just repeat this process over and over, making an infinite number of Dualcaster Mages, all of which have haste thanks to Heat Shimmer. So unless our opponents have a fog or some way to prevent combat damage for that turn, we'll just win right there on the spot. So again, probably not the most fun way to end the game, but it is incredibly powerful and definitely something that's relatively easy to pull off with this deck. Now, with the actual deck tech out of the way, we do have to check in on the price of this deck. And for this time, it came in at $98.31, so not the cheapest deck we've ever made by quite a large margin, but we still have a couple of dollars to play with if we wanted to fine-tune some pieces, maybe add some better lands in here. But most of our price comes from a card that I honestly, when I started doing this series, I would not have been able to put into any of my decks, and it is Imperial Recruiter. It's 2 and a red for a human advisor, 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, you search your library for a creature card with power 2 or less, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. Now, most of the time this is going to get Archaeomancer, but if we're able to copy it a bunch of times, we could get most of the creatures out of our deck. There's not a ton of creatures we run that are stronger than 2 power, so Imperial Recruiter is a phenomenal tutor for the deck like this, which is why it's got that $8.24 price tag. However, with that being said, if you wanted to cut it, get the deck down to around $90, that's doable, but Imperial Recruiter is very nice for multiple reasons. We're able to get Archaeomancer, we're able to copy it. It's very much an all-star in this deck, so if you happen to have one or you don't mind the $8 price tag, I'd say it's a very good card to have for this deck if you're able to. Now, since we have all of the deck tech out of the way, we've talked about all the pricing, we are going to jump into a game. And to do that, we have 3 opponents for today. We have Sliver Overlord being played by Shawn, Minsk Beloved Ranger being played by Bilal, and Kaidel, Chosen of Krufix, partnered up with Eligith, Crossroads Augur, played by Jason. So Sliver Overlord kind of does what it says right there on the card. It's a Sliver tribal deck. Shawn wants to ramp out a bunch of Slivers, give them all buffs from each other, and just slam into his opponents. Minsk Beloved Ranger for Bilal. From what he mentioned, I think it's actually a bit of a giant tribal deck, which I'm very interested to see. And out of all of my opponents for this game, if I could die to a 1/1 hamster, I would call that a victory in my book. And then Eligith and Kaidel for Jason. I've played against this deck a few times. It is very powerful. Eligith able to turn scry triggers into draw triggers, and then Kaidel able to add mana equal to the cards you've drawn, is a very, very powerful combination. I've died to this deck quite a bit in the past, so I think looking at everything going on here, I think Kaidel and Eligith is probably the biggest threat to us, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Sliver Overlord and Minsk just churned out a bunch of creatures and started running people over. So I'm interested to see how this game goes. I hope you guys enjoy it, and I will talk to you all once it's over. At the start of the game, Shawn goes first, followed by Jason, Bilal, and myself. On Shawn's first turn, he plays a Forest and casts Virulent Sliver, giving all slivers Poisonous 1. Jason plays a Rejuvenating Spring. Bilal plays a Needle Verge Pathway. I play a Yavimaya Coast. Shawn plays a Mountain and then attacks Jason for 1, giving him a poison counter. In his second main phase, he then casts Gemhide Sliver, letting all slivers tap for a mana of any color. Jason plays a Forest. Bilal plays a Forest and then casts Findhorn Elves. I play a Frontier Bivouac. Shawn plays a Swamp and then casts Sliver Legion, giving all slivers +1/+1 for each other sliver on the battlefield. And then at the end of turn, Jason flashes in Omen of the Sea to scry 2 and draw a card. Then on Jason's turn, he plays an island and casts Lifecrafter's Bestiary, letting him scry 1 in his upkeep. Bilal plays a Rugged Prairie, and then casts a Shatter the Sky, destroying all creatures and drawing Shawn a card. On my turn, I play an Exotic Orchard and pass. Shawn plays a Mutavault, and then casts Wilderness Reclamation, letting him untap his lands in his end step, which he then does, and passes. In Jason's upkeep, he scries 1, and then plays Reliquary Tower, giving him no maximum hand size, and casts his commander Kydel, Chosen of Krufix. Bilal plays a Mountain and casts Icing Death Frost Tyrant. I play an island, and then cast Mythos of Illuna, making a token copy of Icing Death, and, since I spent red and green mana on it as well, having my token fight Kydel, killing Jason's commander. Shawn plays a Mountain and casts Muscle Sliver, giving all slivers +1/+1, and Hollowhead Sliver, giving his slivers the ability to tap, discard a card, and draw a card. In his end step, he untaps all of his lands. In Jason's upkeep, he scries 1, and then casts an Ominous Seas. He follows that up by playing a Simic Growth Chamber, returning an island to his hand. Bilal plays an Alpine Meadow, and then casts Liquimetal Torque, followed by Garruk's Uprising, which allows him to draw a card when it enters, and gives his creatures trample, and lets him draw a card whenever he plays a creature power 4 or greater. He then moves to combat and attacks Shawn for 4 with Icing Death. On my turn, I cast a Pattern of Rebirth on Icing Death, letting me search my library for a creature and put it into play when the dragon dies. I then attack Bilal for 4, and in my second main phase, I play a Gruul Turf, returning an island to my hand. On Shawn's turn, he casts Reflex Sliver, giving all slivers haste, and he then activates Reflex Sliver and Muscle Sliver to discard a card and draw a card twice, before he moves to combat and attacks Jason for 3 with his Hollowhead Sliver. Then, at the end of his turn, Shawn untaps all of his lands. Jason scries 1 in his upkeep, and then he puts a counter on Ominous Seas. He then plays an island and casts his other commander, Eligeth Crossroads Augur, which lets him draw a card whenever he would scry. On Bilal's turn, he casts a Thran Dynamo, followed up by a Baneslayer Angel, and he then plays the Plains before attacking Shawn for 4 with Icing Death. On my turn, I play an island, and then attack Bilal for 4, but he blocks with his Baneslayer, gaining 5 life, and when Icing Death dies, it transforms into Icing Death Frost Tongue. I'm also able to search my deck for a card, which winds up being Imperial Recruiter, and I put it into play. That then lets me search my library for Archaeomancer and put it into my hand. I follow that up by casting Replicate to copy the Imperial Recruiter, and the token then lets me search my deck and put Harmonic Prodigy to my hand. I then cast the Harmonic Prodigy, which lets me copy any abilities of wizards or shamans I control. On Shawn's turn, he casts Bassel Sliver, letting him sacrifice his slivers to make 2 black mana. He then activates Mutavault, turning it into a creature with all creature types, before moving to combat and attacking me for 12. I decide to block one of the slivers with the token Imperial Recruiter, taking 9, and then at the end of turn, Shawn untaps all of his lands. Jason draws a card in his upkeep and 1 for turn, putting 2 counters on Ominous Seas. He then plays a Zalfiran Void, drawing 1, putting another counter on the Seas, and then moves to combat, attacking me for 5 with Elegeth. In his second main phase, he casts Jolrael, Moanvoli Recluse, letting him make a 2/2 cat whenever he draws his second card each turn. On Bilal's turn, he casts his commander, Minsk Beloved Ranger, creating a 1/1 Boo token when he enters. He then casts Hellkite Tyrant, drawing a card. And he then attacks me for 4 with Icing Death. On my turn, I play a Mountain, before casting Archaeomancer to return Mythos of Aluna and Repudiate Replicate to my hand, thanks to Harmonic Prodigy doubling the trigger, and I cast Replicate to make a copy of Imperial Recruiter, which lets me put Kaza Royal Chaser into my hand. On Shawn's turn, he casts Clot Sliver, giving Slivers the ability to pay 2 and regenerate, and then he casts Tempered Sliver, which puts a 1/1 counter on any Slivers that do combat damage to a player. He moves to combat, attacking Jason for 16. Before the blocks, though, Jason casts Deliberate to draw 3 cards, put 3 counters on the Ominous Seas, and make a cat. He also sacrifices Omen of the Sea to draw 2 and put 2 more counters on the Seas. This lets him remove 8 counters from Ominous Seas, creating an 8/8 Kraken token. He then uses the Kraken and the cat to block Muscle Sliver and Tempered Sliver. However, before the damage, Shawn sacrifices Hollowhead Sliver, using the 2 mana to regenerate Muscle Sliver. Then the Tempered Sliver and cat die, while Jason still takes 8. Shawn then moves to his end step, untapping all of his lands. In Jason's upkeep, he draws a card, and 1 for turn, putting 2 counters on the Ominous Seas and making a cat. He plays a Command Tower, casts Soul Ring, and then casts Krufix, God of Horizons, before attacking me for 5 with Elegeth. Bilal, on his turn, casts Burnished Heart, and then attacks me for another 4 with Icing Death. On my turn, I play an island and cast Kaza Royal Chaser. I immediately activate Kaza, making my next instant or sorcery cost 3 less since I control 3 wizards, and this lets me cast Walk the Aeons to take an extra turn. However, in response, Jason casts Counterspell. Determined to keep my extra turn, I respond by casting Arcane Denial, but Jason has yet another answer, countering my counter with a Swan Song. This results in my Walk the Aeons getting countered, but it does give me a 2/2 bird token. On Shawn's turn, he casts Two-Headed Sliver, giving all Slivers Menace, before attacking Jason for 15. Jason blocks with a cat and a Kraken, but Shawn regenerates the blocked Slivers, and then Jason takes 11. At the end of turn, Shawn then untaps all of his lands. In his upkeep, Jason draws a card, and then draws for turn, creating a cat and putting 2 more counters on the Ominous Seas. He casts a 4C, drawing 6 cards thanks to his commander, and then casts AC Tyrant of Gyre Strait, which lets him play an extra land and draw a card whenever he plays a land. He follows that up by playing Yavimaya Coast, drawing a card. He passes to Bilal, and at the end of turn, Bilal sacrifices his Burnished Heart to put 2 lands into play. On Bilal's turn, he casts Arboreal Grazer, not putting a land into play, and then casts Resplendent Angel before attacking me for 5 with Baneslayer Angel, which gains him 5 life. I block with the bird, but still take 3 thanks to Trample. At the end of turn, Bilal makes a 4/4 Angel with the Resplendent Angel, and draws a card from Garruk's Uprising as it enters. On my turn, I play an island, and then cast Mythos of Aluna, copying Archaeomancer to return Walk the Aeons and Mythos of Aluna to my hand. This allows me to cast Walk the Aeons and repeat this loop an infinite number of times, taking infinite extra turns. At this point, everyone else decides to concede, winning me the game. Alright, so that was a wild game, and I think Honestly, in the end, what it came down to is we had multiple turns where our opponents could have killed us, and they chose not to. I think because everyone else kind of looked like a bigger threat. We didn't have a ton of creatures. We weren't doing too much. So I think we were flying under the radar a little bit more than we should, especially after we cast that first Walk the Aeons and had it get countered. We probably should have just died at that point, but somehow we managed to survive. I think everyone else saw the massive creatures and just decided we weren't a threat. And, we decided to take infinite turns and win. So I think this kind of shows some of the power of Archaeomancer. We were able to loop a ton of copy effects, able to just keep casting them, getting them back. And things like Mythos of Aluna were definitely the all-stars here, being able to create a copy of our opponent's things if we needed them, fight our opponent's things if we needed them to. And overall, I think the deck worked out very well. It felt very powerful. I do think that in the future, I would probably add a few more creatures, a little bit more ways to defend ourselves, but I don't think it was too bad overall. I would definitely play this deck again. Everyone else in the game, I think their decks also did what they were trying to do. Definitely very scary at certain points. The slivers and the angels from Bilal in particular were very terrifying, and Jason just had so much value on his side of the board, so I think it was a ton of fun playing this game. I hope you guys enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed playing it. And in the future, if you have any suggestions for videos that you would like to see, if you have suggestions for specific cards that you would like to see made into a deck, I'm always happy to take that challenge. Those are some of my favorite videos that we do, are the requests that people make, because it's something that people enjoy seeing, and they're a ton of fun to play around. So if you have those suggestions, you can send them to me on Twitter. That's down in the description. You can email them to me. You can send them to me on Reddit. You can post them as comments. All of that's in the video description. But I hope you guys had a good time. I hope you enjoyed the deck tech. Hope you enjoyed the game. And I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.